Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the next 30 minutes, we'll make a speed run through all the key business news stories you need to know about from the African continent. From Cairo to Johannesburg, Lagos and Nairobi, we've got you covered. Here's what's coming up. The chocolate maker Cadbury's opts to shut its Kenyan factory in favour of Egyptian imports. Millions are set aside in a bid to spur employment among small enterprises in South Africa. And from the catwalk to being a farmer, we'll have a beauty queen's mission to promote agriculture in focus. Tonight's bulletin starts in Kenya, where Cadbury's local subsidiary will shut down its manufacturing plant this month as part of a global strategy to squeeze as much efficiency as possible out of its supply chain. Now, the company will cease all manufacturing operations in Kenya. It will only retain the marketing and distribution functions here. This decision makes it the second company to exit Kenya in a week after Eveready announced the closure of its dry cell manufacturing plant in Nakuru on Monday. Mondelez International, the US-based parent company of Cadbury Kenya, says it will now focus on resources on manufacturing operations in which it can generate great efficiencies of scale. About 300 Kenyans are going to lose their jobs as a result of this shutdown. The company will import its products from Egypt in order to continue operating in the Kenyan market. Now, this is the second time in a week in which you're focusing on a manufacturing business that's moving its manufacturing operations, quote unquote, from Kenya to Egypt. Now, traditionally, the North African state and South Africa tend to be the point of comparison for Kenya's manufacturing sector. But what is it that, given the political turmoil Egypt has had since 2011, why is it its manufacturing sector is still attractive? Let's find out. Yasser Kim joins us now live from Cairo. Yasser, is Egypt's relative strength as a manufacturing hub compared to other countries in Africa down to just its relatively lower energy prices, or are there other factors at play as well?
No, there are several factors. If you just look at the population, 90 million Egyptians who are known to be high consumers, that's a big market. You've got the geographical location on North Africa, on the tip of Africa, so it's a big source for an open gate for Africa and the Middle East with the different agreements, trade agreements on both sides. Egypt has access to several countries in Africa and the Middle East for any manufacturer there. Like you said, the price of energy is relatively low, even after the rising of prices lately. It's still low. A labor market which is big. It's a huge labor market that could be helpful and cheap as well. It's not an expensive labor market compared to other countries. Egypt already has been an attractive investment hub before the 2011 uprising. Maybe it has lost a little bit of leverage, but it's returning right now, and businessmen see the opportunities in the Egyptian market, especially investment facilities are now being given to investors to come back to Egypt and work again after many of them have left the country in the last 3 years.
Indeed. Let's focus on something you pointed out there with regard to labour. This year's World Economic Forum Global Competitiveness Index pointed out that Egypt's labour market does need some reform. Does President El-Sisi have any plans to boost employment by changing laws relating to labour and employment?
Yes, and it's not just about laws. Laws is a big problem because they're very outdated. A lot of these laws are not good for the worker and even for the investors. Not just about the worker having more rights, but actually investors as well. Especially in the last 3 years after the uprising, there were a lot of strikes, a lot of demonstrations by the laborers, we're talking, and a lot of investors lost money because of that, especially that the laws are more on the laborers' side than the investors, and they have been calling for a change of labor laws. This is one point. Another point is a change in the mentality and the training and the skills for the laborers in Egypt. That's a very important aspect that needs to be addressed because there is a lot of labor, but many of them are not really skilled to the needs of the market. And this is another point that the president and the government are working on trying to solve.
Indeed. Finally, Yasser, to go back to the point you made about having access to Egypt, or rather to various markets, Egypt's exports to COMESA made up just about 8% of its total trade a couple of years ago. Why is it that Egypt doesn't trade more with sub-Saharan countries?
This goes back to the former president Hosni Mubarak. He was not the fan of Africa, if you might call it. He always looked at the West. He always pushed investors to go to the West to deal with the US, with Europe. He didn't really give much attention to Africa or the East in Asia. And this is a mistake that many experts say should be really addressed very quickly. And even in the last couple of years, there has been more activity to get investors to move to Africa, to work with Africa, with sub-Saharan Africa in particular, because there's a lot of potential there, a big market in Africa, a lot of trade agreements like the COMESA, there's raw material that could be used, investments in land, in agriculture, and also opening businesses and factories in many African countries. And I think this is the trend in the next few years in Egypt, is to look to Africa rather than to look at Europe and the US. And it will take time, maybe. You can't even measure on the last couple of years in anything, because Egypt has been suffering economically in the last couple of years anyway. So whether Africa or up north, it wouldn't have really much made a big difference. But putting plans for the future, the president said, and the government, that they are planning to concentrate on Africa more than before.
Indeed, we'll have to leave it there. That's Yasser Kim live there in Cairo. Now, let's move on to another story that has been dominating headlines all the way back from the start of the year. The continued spread of the Ebola virus in West Africa is still wreaking havoc to the region's economy as a whole. Trading and travel in Liberia, Guinea, Sierra Leone has been virtually paralyzed. Mining and farming in all three countries have been severely disrupted as laborers and farmers do remain grounded. Now, economic analysts say over 30% of business activity has stalled in the affected regions.
Deserted markets, industry disrupted, and flights cancelled. As well as already having killed over 3,000 people across West Africa, the Ebola virus has already infected the region's economy. In Liberia, hardest hit by the epidemic, the economic focus looked grim.
We see overall GDP projected to drop at 2.5%, and if this continues, likely to go negative. We see a potential impact of a little over $350 billion in terms of economic activities.
In Sierra Leone, the quarantining of whole towns has meant the movement of 1.2 million people, and local trade has been hit hard.
Since the emergence of the Ebola crisis, people are afraid to come and sell to us, and they're also afraid to come and buy. Before, when we went to market, we were able to buy goods cheaply. But now, since they're taking a risk to come here, the goods are very expensive.
With some airlines abandoning the region altogether, hotels like this one in Guinea lie empty.
We're at around 0% occupancy. I have 50 rooms in this hotel and there are only 2 taken. They're Senegalese who can no longer pay because the borders are closed and there are no more flights.
The International Monetary Fund has granted an aid package of $130 million to Guinea, Sierra Leone and Liberia, but the economic impact of Ebola is estimated at $100 million for each country.
Well, I think what we see with Ebola is there's almost like a slow squeezing of the different countries and the commodities sector. It's not that there's been any massive disinvestment suddenly, but what is happening is a slowdown of all operations. Everyone is putting everything on the back burner in terms of new investment.
This is a worrying trend for the affected countries, although economic growth for many is the least of their concerns now. Alan Kiprop for CCTV.
A water crisis that has affected parts of Johannesburg and surrounding areas of that city in South Africa still continues to bite. 10 days ago, a series of events led to a water shortage, which left many a community without water. Angelo Coppola filed this report from Johannesburg.
The political leaders in Rand Water Utility Management have been at pains to tell the public that the crisis will be dealt with. On Monday, the minister went so far as to say that water was now being delivered to all areas. This raised some eyebrows.
For 10 days, we didn't have a drop of water. So we have to take water out of the swimming pool. We have to buy water to drink. and you turn the tap on every morning and there's absolutely nothing. You cannot believe how horrible it is to have no water.
For people who run small businesses from their homes, a water shortage is the last thing that they need.
My clients have to use the bucket for the toilets. I paint a lot, and so we're continually running out of water, and it's embarrassing.
Rand Water announced last week that they had established a call centre which consumers could phone to check when water would be delivered to their areas. The call centre has been inundated with calls from distraught businesses and residents who don't have access to boreholes.
The lady says to me, no, you're going to have a problem with the flow of water, the pressure's going to be low, but 2 days and you'll have water. Well, 2 days and we don't have a drop, not even a low pressure, we don't have a drop.
It's 1 day to go before the self-imposed deadline that was placed by the Rand Water Board CEO to have water delivered to all the affected areas. Clearly not everyone has water, and clearly people are upset. We'll wait to see when everybody actually does get water and whether this problem has been resolved. I'm Angelo Coppola for CCTV in Krugersdorp on the west side of Johannesburg.
Let's revisit one of our top stories today. The focus, of course, on the economic damage that is being wreaked by Ebola right across West Africa, specifically in Guinea, Liberia and Sierra Leone. Let's get some more details on the funding side of it, or at least of the response to that crisis, from Kelly Lemon. She's live in London right now. Kelly, with regard to the economic damage being done by Ebola, how does it compare to the sort of economic damage you tend to see after civil conflict? Are these two comparable?
Well, there are some similarities in the sense that we're seeing countries appeal for international support in terms of financial aid and resources on the ground. We're seeing both the human and financial cost of the crisis, and there's no sign the situation is coming to a close. So, yes, there are some similarities in terms of international reaction, but the causes are very different, as is the long-term impact. Now, we're dealing with a humanitarian crisis which isn't politically motivated. The outbreak isn't restricted to one area, and the nature of the crisis is very different, and that's why we're seeing the countries involved suffer economically.
Now, in late September, the IMF did estimate that the funding gap in the response to the Ebola crisis was about $300 million. Do we have any idea how big the funding gap is today?
Well, it's very difficult to calculate, and since this crisis emerged, it's been quite problematic for authorities to crack down on all the necessary figures. Remember, the scale of the outbreak, the various different locations and governments involved, and it's a very liquid situation. Now, the IMF approved $130 million of aid last week and warned of the economic consequences. Today, the UK is making a plea for international help, with one charity warning 5 people are being infected with the virus every hour in Sierra Leone.
Indeed. Finally, Kelly, most of the cash that's going into the emergency funding right now is going into getting personal protective equipment, training of health workers, essential materials and so on. But even despite the lack of data, do we have an idea of what funding needs will have to be met after the outbreak has been contained?
Well, then it's a case of looking at the longer term impact for the countries involved. The fund dealing with the financial aid says preliminary estimates indicate the crisis could shave at least 3 percentage points from economic growth in Liberia and Sierra this year. And that's key, because a lot of these regions were enjoying economic growth prior to this crisis, which is why analysts are so concerned about the damage this will do to the countries as they look to recover from the crisis. And that's when we're really going to look at the long term impact and the help that will be needed then.
Indeed, we'll have to leave it there. Kelly Lemon live in London. Let's make a quick run through the markets here for you. A clean slate of red numbers, as it were, right across the board. Down about 2/10 in Nigeria, the all-share down about 1/3, or rather 2/3 in South Africa. This is a 4th day of declines in the JSE, broadly the exact same story that we've been seeing across the board. Commodity prices falling down, and that's dragging mineral stocks a lot lower. But the decline has not been restricted to just mineral stocks. Nedbank, for example, it announced it's taking up a 20% stake in Ecobank and for about $500 million or so. But its shares ended the day lower today, down 1.8%. We've got plenty more coming up. Ethiopia is positioning itself to reap from the global tourist market. We'll tell you how. And millions are being set aside to spur employment by SMEs in South Africa. All that and more is coming up. Africa is on the move. It's home to 7 of the world's 10 fastest growing economies. We help you make sense of the fast-changing African business landscape. We take you where the business is happening.
African leaders have been urged to make it easier to move and do business across borders within the African continent.
Africans should be free to move in their continent, to do business, to interact, if we are to grow the levels of investment and trade that will ensure that we are able to create the jobs for our people that we require.
"15 minutes into the hour, you're still watching Global Business Africa. Now, for years, Ethiopia's tourism sector has lagged far behind other African nations. The most recent comparable data from about 2011 show that Africa's most popular destinations, that's Morocco and South Africa, got well over 8 million visitors each in 2011. In the same year, Ethiopia just got over 500,000. 3 years later, however, tourist traffic is slowly growing.
Ethiopia is enjoying an influx of holidaymakers, thanks to improved infrastructure and upgraded tourism sites. The Horn of Africa nation is also benefiting from playing host to the African Union, the UN Economic Commission for Africa and other international organizations. The country is also a preferred location to host meetings, like the just concluded African Hotel Investment Forum, where more than 500 hotel industry stakeholders participated.
What Africa should do is what Africa has been doing in the past. Continue at the internal strength of Africa. Work on developing Africa itself by Africans. The reason is that had it been with the opinion of the outside world, Africa wouldn't have gone anywhere, specifically Ethiopia. Ethiopia has been portrayed as a one-story country. We Ethiopians know better. We have many stories. We have been major setters of civilization in the past. Today, Ethiopians are saying we're going to reclaim our renaissance and we're going to claim back that power.
According to the Ethiopian Ministry of Culture and Tourism, visitors to Ethiopia are now growing by 10% in numbers each year. Research shows that tourism's contribution to the nation's foreign exchange earnings could eventually overtake coffee, which has been #1 for a long time. However, the country still has a long way to go to reach the same level as its neighbor Kenya. Despite a spate of terrorism attacks in the country, East Africa's biggest economy still remains one of the most toured destinations in sub-Saharan Africa. Kenya has introduced new strong IT services and mobile payment solutions to attract even more tourists.
We can have incentives, but I think mainly it's the ease of doing business that should be very important. Because I can say, yes, logistics also need to be improved, but logistics take much longer. To build a road takes much longer than instituting a reduction in some taxes.
Ethiopia has 9 World Heritage Sites and around 50 national parks. Analysts say to maintain the growth momentum in tourist numbers, the government should continue to build more infrastructure that meets the expectations of the industry. Maria Galang, CCTV.
South Africa is gearing up for the biggest job creation drive in its history. Sumitra Naidu reports the government is concentrating its efforts on enabling small and medium-sized enterprises create 11 million jobs in the next 15 years.
CEDA, the Small Enterprise Development Agency, was established 10 years ago under the Department of Trade and Industry to help entrepreneurs grow their businesses. The agency does not provide any funding, but helps to develop businesses with support and mentorship.
People who really want to sell some apples and bananas in a street corner somewhere, they do come to CEDA for things like business profiles, business plans. So that's where we start, up to a level where we supply services to people like small enterprises that want to export overseas, that want to create more jobs.
Unemployment in South Africa has remained at levels above 25% for years, a crisis for the government and the economy. Most of the country's unemployed are young people between the ages of 18 and 34. South Africa is now targeting its small business sector to be the driver of job creation from now until 2030.
SEDA needs to, in my mind, around the cooperatives especially space, is to go back to the fundamental ideology of the movement of cooperatives, because we have almost been working in SMME spaces, but we have forgotten that cooperatives is a movement. It's about building communities.
Since its inception, SEDA has helped to grow more than 120,000 businesses.
They've helped me to actually, from starting of the business plan, to have my business plan done. This is 9 years ago.
SEDA initially helped me with when I came to them to do my packaging design for me and labels. Got onto the market. I was in a brown paper bag when I approached SEDA, and I've managed now. I'm in Pick n Pay exclusively with my one range, and I'm also exporting with my other range.
But it hasn't been enough. With the growing youth population, efforts to grow the small business sector need to be amplified.
The opportunities for the young will lie in them taking up the opportunity to become entrepreneurs and have that entrepreneurial culture in order to make sure that they not only improve their lives, but also they contribute to the development of their own country.
SEDA will now be working closely with the newly formed Small Business Ministry, launched by President Jacob Zuma earlier this year.
We tend, as entrepreneurs, we're looking at the global stage, but in fact, the global stage is looking at Africa. And part of looking at Africa, they want us to value and to sell our things African, with African nuances. So the entrepreneur really needs to be aware of the environment that he or she is sitting in. Because first, it's the environment that will support whatever your product is, so doing things African should come natural.
There will also be a big push towards incorporating South Africans that live in rural areas.
Women are the drivers of rural economies, and usually with a bit more exposure, experience and support, it's easier to grow that. And there's an opportunity that lies down here. You see it not only in South Africa, throughout Africa. At the same time, if you look at our townships, for instance, there's a lot of entrepreneurial activity in the townships, and there's a golden mine there.
36% of young South Africans are jobless. This is just over 50% of the total number of people unemployed in the country. It's hoped government's renewed efforts will pay off. Samisha Nadu, CCTV, Durban.
Now, for the very first time, Pepsi is introducing a product exclusively through Amazon. The idea here is to expand its footprint on the e-commerce platform and gather data while they're at it. The product is a naturally sweetened soda called Pepsi True. It will be available on Amazon in mid-October this year in 24 packs of 7.5-ounce cans. It will not, however, be available in traditional brick-and-mortar outlets. Pepsi, however, said it plans to eventually sell it in grocery stores. By introducing True through Amazon, Pepsi says it can better assess demand and gain insight into where people are buying it ahead of a wider launch. Industry insiders say this move essentially illustrates how the food and beverage industry is expanding into non-traditional distribution channels.
Selling it only on Amazon initially does not allow sampling because you've got to buy it. On the other hand, launching products on Amazon is getting Pepsi and Coke with Surge a tremendous amount of media exposure, possibly more than if they launched them in more conventional ways. And so, one thing, certain things always offset other things.
Quick run through commodity prices here for you. Cocoa, of course, is not exactly having a decent day out in the markets today, down by about 2% give or take. But focusing on the back end, on the production side, it seems there's a bit of a price war going on between Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. Ghana, of course, raised prices by 63% to about $1,720 a ton for the next season, 2014-2015. Ostensibly, the idea here is to deter smuggling. That's slightly higher than the prices that are on offer in Cote d'Ivoire. We've seen a lot of commodities moving back and forth between those two producers over the last couple of years due to that price differential. Now, as is the case in much of sub-Saharan Africa, unemployment does remain a major problem in Uganda. We've seen one approach to dealing with that in South Africa, but that's more of a macro issue. Let's look at a micro solution. An unlikely ambassador in Uganda is hoping to change the perception that many have of farming as a viable long-term career. A 24-year-old beauty queen has turned her hand to farming, and she hopes many will follow in her footsteps. For Grassroots Tonight, Isabel Nakiria caught up with Fiona Nasaka in central Uganda.
She doesn't mind getting her hands dirty. Fiona Nasaka is the reigning Miss Talent in Uganda, but farming is her first love. She rears animals and grows fruit and vegetables at her farm in Kapeka in central Uganda.
What really drives me into farming is where the future is seeing Africa, because Africa is going to be the answer of all, probably the whole world in terms of food, because Africa, be it Kenya, be it Uganda, be it Tanzania, most especially here, Uganda, we have the best fertile soils ever.
Fiona didn't have a farming background, so knowing what to do at the beginning was a big challenge.
We had to plant some seeds which did not grow up. Why? Because they were not planted in a greenhouse. Yet for us we planted them outdoor because we didn't have a greenhouse. We didn't have a water system because we are mainly dealing in vegetables and fruits. Yet vegetables need continuous, water. So we really faced a challenge of that. Like, we lost customers, we lost clients because we were not constant.
Agriculture makes up around 37% of Uganda's gross domestic revenue, but many farmers practice subsistence farming, growing just enough to feed themselves and their families. Over 70% of Uganda's population is aged between 18 and 35, and many are jobless, but still do not venture into farming. At 24, Nasaka does not regret becoming a farmer and encourages her contemporaries to consider the same path. At this year's beauty pageant, Uganda wants to see contestants promote agriculture skills. The beauty contestants will visit this farm. Nasaka says it will be an opportunity to inspire more females to take up agriculture.
Miss Uganda is going to focus on agriculture this year. So why am I saying they are lucky? They're not going to be like us who entered agriculture without any knowledge. They're going to go to the real experts, the farmers who are experts. They tell them ideas, what farming methods they're supposed to do, which kind of crops are on market.
And it's a topical concept as for the majority of Ugandans. The agriculture sector is a big part of their livelihood. For Nasaka, her reign as Miss Talent Uganda ends soon, and she's decided she feels much more at home on the farm than on the catwalk. Isabel Nakiria, CCTV, Kapeka, Central Uganda.
Let's make a quick run through the currencies here for you. As far as Nigeria's Naira is concerned, it might get a bit of a support from dollar sales by NNPC next week. The Kenyan shilling, on the other hand, is still under pressure. It's pretty much a supply-demand story over here. Plus, of course, add in the fact that you've got dollar strength on the other side of the equation. But that's it for this edition of Global Business. You know the usual drill. Feedback to globalbusinessafrica@cctv.com. Facebook and Twitter is your constant stop for any news that you don't see while we are not on air. We'll see you in 23 hours. I'm Raman Yang. Thank you for your time.